Hey Sunrise, it's Andrew here with your small group questions for this week as we dive into Genesis chapter 32. So Jacob has now left Haran. He is on his way home. And so this is where our text begins. So it begins first with Jacob coming across the angels and calling the place Maham. What stands out to you in this very opening transition? How does this set up the transition from what has been taking place in Haran and then moving us forward into the promised land? How is this a good transition for us? And then from this, we begin to see the move back towards Esau. So he knows he's left one situation behind, one still stands before him. So what do you make of Jacob's fear in this moment? How does that stand out looking back over 20 plus years, how he's come to this moment? How does that fear stand out? Into that, we see his fear then leads to a prayer to God. And how does that mirror his experience in Bethel? How are all these things coming together? How are we seeing the beginning of Jacob's story leaving, now parallel into his return? So what are some of the joys that are seen in this prayer? It is a wonderful prayer of hope in God and also a prayer for God's protection in the midst of his uncertainties. So what are some of the things in this prayer that really hit you in light of Jacob's story? Also in light of, as you read the prayer, Jacob's fear and even Jacob's planning from it. So he goes from this prayer that then leads into this planning of dividing his family into two camps even. So how was all this fear and planning coming together that you see Jacob in the midst of this in light of his view of God? And ultimately you can even see in all this, how are the people of Israel connected here in this moment to Jacob? What are some of the significant things that we can see that mirror their own experience, and then of course our own experiences of prayer and fear and planning, how these things work together? So again, so you work through some of those things that then gets us to what are some of the things stand on his plan, the sending of these blessings, these gifts to appease Esau. How does this kind of parallel, again, his own desire to make things right? What is it that he's trying to make right with Esau? And how do the gifts fit into him trying to make those things right? And then we transition to what is this big text? It's right in the middle of, we have this coming of Esau, we have the wrestling with God, and then of course we'll have the meeting with Esau. But so we get to the juicy part right here in the middle, like Jacob wrestles with God. What are some of the things that stand out in this text to you? What do you make of the man who he wrestles with, who Jacob wrestled with? How do we see that as God? What are some of the things in the text that point to the fact that is the divine being in some way, shape, or form? How is God presented here? What is the significance then of the fact that it is until daybreak and that it ends before daybreak? And of course, the naming of Jacob as Israel. So how does that all parallel into this moment? And what does it mean for Jacob and for the history of his people in this? And so of course we have the naming, the blessing here, if you will. What is the struggle in hearing this blessing? What is it that you hear that you have striven with God and with man and prevailed? What does that mean? What does it really hit you with what God is saying about Israel? What is God saying about Jacob through this moment? And so ultimately, as we bring this to a conclusion, we have the touching of Jacob's hip, that he touches it, dislocates it, if you will, and he will walk with a limp for the rest of his life. How does that connect with the prevailing against God, if you will, prevent man and God? How the hip touch kind of puts a spin on that to a degree. Then again, the reminder to him for the rest of his life and to the Israelite people of this limp. So as you work yourself through this text, as you read it, think deeply about it. Again, move on into 33 a little bit as we get the Esau narrative continuing. We'll pick up a little bit more on that next week as we dive into that text. But really, I hope you'll spend some time really working through the depth of what God is doing here, so you're prepared to hear the word proclaimed and applied on Sunday. Can't wait to see you guys.